So today I'm going to talk about gear that I consider near essential for landscape photography. So in a previous video, I looked at things that I consider essential gear for landscape photography. Those are the basics you need to just get started, such as a camera, a lens, a tripod. Well, today I'm going to look at near essential pieces of gear for landscape photography. These are things you don't necessarily need to get started with landscape photography, but they'll make your job just a little easier out there in the field. Either make you a little more efficient, allow you to be a little more creative with your images, just tools that generally overall can help improve your landscape photography. So let's dive in and take a look at those near essential pieces of gear for landscape photography. So the first piece of gear we're going to talk about is the L bracket. And I've talked about the L bracket before in a previous video, the most underrated piece of gear in landscape photography. But it's important to mention this because I see this as just one of the things that would be one of my first purchases after camera, lens, and a tripod is this L bracket. And an L bracket is this orange bracket right here. This is made for the Z6 II so that you can get access to the ports. But what it does is it lets you mount your camera both landscape mode very easily. It just fits right on there. This is an Arca Swiss version, just fits on. Now where the advantage comes in is if I'm taking this picture and I want to switch it to portrait mode, if I don't have an L bracket, then I need to rotate my tripod head over like this so I can bring it over like this. But let's look at what happens when I did that. Here I am up here like this, right? I'm in landscape mode, focusing this way, and I want to change my composition. So I drop my camera, a couple things happen. My composition changes rather dramatically because I've just shifted everything over. On top of that, if I'm using a larger lens or a heavier lens, my tripod starts to get unstable because I've put the weight over to the side. So I've started to unbalance my tripod, which in these landscape photography conditions, you're usually on uneven ground anyway, so that can, cause a problem. You're not always on the most stable platform rotating your camera over. So by having an L bracket, instead of having to rotate that over, what you can do instead is you'll be up here in your landscape form and you decide you want to change your composition. You just pop your camera off the top, rotate it, clamp down, and then you're good. You've kept the weight over the tripod, nice and centered. You haven't changed your composition that dramatically, and you're still on a stable platform. In addition, it can also make your panoramas a little easier because instead of being off to the side and coming across, messing up your composition, you're sitting on top of your tripod, so your panoramas can be nice and smooth. And it allows you to get a nice, stable mounting surface. Like I said, this is a piece of gear that I underestimated. I didn't use one for a long time. I just lived with, okay, I'll rotate my camera over, move my tripod around, and it just isn't the most efficient way. Since I've added a tripod onto my camera, it's just been amazing. Makes things more efficient, makes me more likely to try different compositions. Don't underestimate the value of an L bracket. They are really a great asset to landscape photography. And while you don't need one to get started, I think it should be one of your early gear purchases. I did do a video on L brackets, a previous one, the most underestimated piece of gear in landscape photography. Check that video out. I give some hints on what to look for in buying an L bracket and some other more in-depth reasons why I think an L bracket is a great investment for your landscape photography. So the next piece of gear we're going to talk about are filters, and specifically I'm going to take a quick look at the circular polarizer filter and the ND filter, and we'll touch on how these can help improve your landscape photography, give you a nice base image to work from, sometimes get some additional creative elements, especially when it comes to moving subjects like clouds or water. So let's dive in. We'll take a look at the circular polarizer first, and then we'll take a look at the ND filter second, and we'll talk about why I think they are near essential pieces of gear for landscape photography. So the first filter we'll talk about is a circular polarizer, and I've reviewed some of these on my channel before in the past, but a circular polarizer fits on the front of your lens. This is a circular polarizer filter, so it screws on to the front of the lens like this. This is an 82 millimeter, and what you can do is you can rotate this to help reduce the glare on what you're photographing. So typically water has lots of glare to it. If you're photographing waterfalls, both the water coming down the falls as well as the water on the rocks that are near the falls will all have some sort of glare coming off of it. And the circular polarizer, you put it on the front of your lens and it helps reduce that glare. So it gives you darker tones, and it helps you see through, so you can see through that surface of the water to what's under it. And you just adjust it, you rotate it until you get it to the right angle that you want, and then you're good to go. It can also be handy out in the woodlands and things like that where there's green leaves. They have lots of water in them, so they actually can throw off a lot of glare. So you can put a circular polarizer on, and it just helps increase the saturation of your image in your base layer without a lot of Photoshop afterwards or anything like that. This is a great filter to start with, very versatile. Like I said, I tend to use it for waterfalls, or if I'm outside in a lot of green foliage, things like that, I'll put it on the front of my lens, and it'll help cut down on that glare and just give me those darker tones and increase saturation, reduce that glare. It can also be good on a hazy day. It can sort of punch through some of that haze just to sort of take it out. So those summer days when it's sort of humid, you can put this polarizer on and it'll help cut through some of that haze as well. So a circular polarizer is a valuable tool, I think, for landscape photography. So as you get more into it, it should probably be one of the earlier filters that you buy, because it's just pretty versatile, both with photographing waterfalls, woodlands, grass, anything like that. It's a good one to have. The other filter I want to talk about is just a regular ND filter. And that is, again, mine is a circular. They do make systems where you can sort of put a bracket on the front of your lens and slide in different filters. I happen to use the screw-on front ones. This is an ND filter. It is a 6-stop ND filter. So again, like the circular polarizer, this just fits onto the front of the lens and screws on. And an ND filter is almost like sunglasses for your camera lens. So if you're out photographing something on a bright day, it will reduce the amount of light getting to the sensor. This particular one will knock 6 stops of light off. So if I'm looking at this scene over here, and I put this on, it will require me making camera setting changes to compensate for losing 6 stops of light. So where that can be handy is if you're trying to photograph, say, a waterfall, and you want that blurred effect, but it's sort of bright out, and you can't get your shutter speed slow enough to get that effect. If you put this ND filter on, you can be out on a brighter day, still be able to slow your shutter speed down to start blurring that motion, blurring that movement. I talked a lot about that in my shutter speed video on using shutter speed to blur motion, freeze motion. Well, this ND filter will help you blur motion on a brighter day. Say you're photographing clouds, you're trying to do time lapse, or the slow movement of clouds, storm clouds coming across the sky. You can put an ND filter on, and that will let you slow your shutter down a little more so you can sort of blur that movement. So that's where an ND filter comes in handy. So I like to photograph waterfalls, and I can't always do it in the morning. Sometimes it's more in the afternoon sun. Being able to put this ND filter on helps me still be in a position where I can slow that shutter down to get the blur I want. So very handy filter to have. They do make various stops. They make 3 stops, 6 stops, 10 stops. You can stack them. If you're going to go out and only get one, I would recommend a 6-stop filter. It's pretty versatile, works in a lot of situations, and is a pretty good starter one for a landscape photographer. So if you do go with the filters that screw onto the front of your lens, my one piece of advice, whether you're buying a circular polarizer or an ND filter, is be sure to buy the filter to the size of the filter type of your largest lens. So for example, in my kit, this 14 to 30 is the largest filter size that I have in my kit. And you can see that on the front of the lens, I'll typically say this one's an 82. All my other lenses are smaller than that. So I buy my filter as an 82, and then I use step down rings to get them to fit on my smaller lenses. So like to fit on my 24-70, I can screw this filter onto this ring, which changes the filter size, and then I can put it on my smaller lens. That keeps you from having to buy expensive filters for each one of your lenses. Buy for your largest, use step-down rings to get to your others. It's a great way to save a little bit of money, keep yourself versatile. Step-down rings are important if you're using the type of filters that fit onto here. And the last piece of near essential gear we're going to take a look at is your camera bag. And take a look at a couple of the reasons why it's important and how it can help make your landscape photography more efficient. So don't underestimate the importance of a good camera bag. As your landscape photography adventures start taking you further and further out into the field, there's several things that start to come into play that are important to consider. One is comfort. Does the bag feel good? Does it carry well? You could be hiking 2 to 3 miles into a location, which isn't terribly far, but if you're carrying a fair amount of weight, you want to make sure that it feels comfortable on your hike. You usually want to make sure it has a good waist belt, things like that. Make sure the shoulder straps are comfortable. Those are some of the things to keep an eye out for. Make sure the bag is comfortable. You also want to make sure it can carry the amount of gear that you typically take out in the field. When you get started, that might just be the camera and one lens, so they don't need to be huge bags. But as you get more serious and you start to accumulate more lenses that you take out in the field, and maybe a backup body, you may want to make sure your bag has the flexibility to grow with you, either by adding additional units inside the bag to help protect your gear, make sure there's room for filters and cleaning kits and everything like that. So, when you're looking at a bag, make sure it can carry the amount of gear that you typically take out into the field. And because so much landscape photography, it's actually done in inclement weather when there's clouds or potential rain, because that's when you get some interesting skies and interesting scenes that are a little more than just the normal sunny day scenes. So you want to make sure your bag can protect your gear. That can mean both from impact, you know, something falling, maybe you fall while hiking. So you want to make sure it has enough padding inside to protect your camera and your lenses and your filters and things like that. So that's the first thing you want to protect. Two, if it is cloudy, there's a good chance of rain, and you want to make sure that your bag will protect your bag from the elements. As you've seen in some of my videos, I've been out in the snow with this bag, no problems. The key thing being make sure it's waterproof, water resistant. Make sure maybe it comes with a cover for those really torrential downpours to help protect your gear, because it's important to protect your gear both from impact as well as water and moisture. So that's another important feature to look for in a camera bag. The other thing I like to look for in a camera bag is to make sure it has just enough extra room for some of the outdoor gear I need. Maybe I need a small rain jacket, or maybe I want to shed some layers of clothing while I'm out. I need to make sure there's enough room after I have all of my camera gear packed to be able to put some of that either into my bag or out of my bag as needed. In addition to that, just going into other gear, making sure it has a spot to carry a tripod. You know, tripods are important for landscape photography, so, you know, I like to make sure my bag has a way to carry a tripod. Another thing that's important is water bottles. When you're on those longer hikes, you usually need some fluids and some water. So I like to make sure my bag has at least water bottle pockets, or some way that's built in and designed to carry a water bottle, and it's not some afterthought, because I like to have my fluids and my water out there on the trail. So make sure it can pack all those extra things other than your camera gear and your camera equipment that might be important. You know, the tripods, the outer clothing gear that you might need as temperatures warm up, cool down, rains, stops raining, things like that. So I even like to have a way to carry my ice spikes on this on icy days, and this bag has plenty of attachment points for things like that. So it's important to keep an eye out on those types of features as well. And the final feature I like to look for in a camera bag is how well it can travel. I like something that's big enough to carry my gear, but small enough to fit into the cabin of the plane with me. And that can be fitting underneath the seat on an airplane, or at the very least being able to be checked in the overhead storage with that. So typically you can look at the specs of a bag and they'll either say that it's, you know, FAA compatible, or will give you dimensions that you can measure to check. So that is something that's important to me. And I've flown with bags that literally do fit underneath the seat in front of me, to slightly larger ones where I just need to be sure I get onto the plane early so that I can make sure it gets fit into the overhead compartments. But that's important. Make sure that you're not going to get stopped at the gate for something that's oversized and isn't allowed in the cabin of the plane if you're doing any form of traveling at all. So that is something else to keep an eye out for. How compatible with travel is your landscape photography bag? So that wraps up today's video on near essential gear for landscape photography. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, this is gear that you don't have to get started. Don't let not having some of this keep you from getting out and practicing. But as you start to get more involved in landscape photography and you're looking for ways to further improve or make things more efficient, these are some of the pieces of gear I would look for. I will link into the description anything that is relevant on my channel that might help. For example, a closer look at L brackets, a closer look at certain circular polarizers and ND filters. Those will be linked to in the description. Head on down there, take a look, and you can get a little more in-depth information on some of those. And if you like today's video, please hit the like button. And if you want to see future landscape photography content from me in the future, including gear reviews, behind the scenes, tips and tricks, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any landscape photography content from me in the future. And thank you for watching.